So we are living in an age of cryptocurrency millionaires. I don't know if we're quite there yet at billionaires, but certainly we have many folks walking around who have made millions on things like Bitcoin, and a open question remains as to whether this is actually something that could be a real currency in the future, or if it's simply a commodity that increases and decreases in value based upon what someone has said on Twitter or how people are feeling that day. But it has created interesting developments around the country, including Wyoming attempting to be the crypto capital of the U.S. And this story comes from us from Elena Botella in writing in Slate. And Elena, let's just start with, does Wyoming want to be, or are there people who are able to push Wyoming in that way?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. So, just as a little bit of background, Wyoming now has passed more than 20 laws that are really designed to lure cryptocurrency companies into the state. And all of this started really from the push of one woman, Caitlin Long. She was a longtime Wall Street executive, managing director at Morgan Stanley, who moved back to her home state of Wyoming and was able to successfully convince the state to establish this task force. Then she was a voting member of the task force to write legislation luring companies into the state. And so obviously Wyoming has had a hard time in some ways. Coal mines are being shut down and that's a major industry there. They're actually the biggest coal producers in the country. And so they were looking for opportunities to diversify their economy, maybe thinking that crypto could be it for them. But so far, it looks like they've had, while they've brought companies into the state, those companies aren't necessarily creating jobs, paying a lot of taxes, or doing the sorts of things that would actually be helpful to ordinary residents.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there because what I think is fascinating about this story is that it reveals sort of like, the scope and the value of any locality to the industry that is cryptocurrency, but it also speaks to the ability of folks who have an agenda to influence an entire state if it's small enough. I mean, so it's not like, let's be clear, it's not like Wyoming was out there fishing around for cryptocurrencies. This was all basically a reaction to a push by Caitlin Long, like you mentioned, former managing director at Morgan Stanley, who has been pushing this. So talk about like just how there came to be a commission that was examining these things, and how someone who seemed to have, or maybe I guess her conflict of interest happened commission first, then what appears to me to be a significant conflict of interest.
Yeah, so I think the biggest conflict of interest here, to kind of jump the gun a little bit, is that Caitlin Long then went on to found a cryptocurrency bank effectively. So Wyoming's really the only place in the country where you can really form this special type of bank. They call it a special purpose depository institution, or SPEDI for short. That's really designed to kind of capture all of the benefits and privileges that banks have in our economy without actually being regulated in the way that a traditional bank would be. So if anybody is worried about, financial risk, I know most of us are old enough to remember the financial crisis. You know that having unregulated banks can be pretty risky. The story here is that Caitlin Long, while still living in New York, the story she says is that she wanted to make a donation to her alma mater of University of Wyoming to set up a scholarship. And she wanted to do it with Bitcoin. And she found out, apparently, that the state couldn't accept the donations in Bitcoin. Because of their money transmitter law. So the story she says is that, I stepped forward to get this rule changed, and one thing led to another. But I think, certainly her impact was very outsized. So the legislator established the committee on blockchain. She was appointed to the committee by the governor, and she actually had a vote on what bills would make it out of the committee. So it's a pretty big level of influence to then be able to kind of create the laws to charter this new type of bank. And only 2 companies have taken this step to charter a bank of this sort in Wyoming. One being the company that she's founded, Avanti, the other being Kraken, which listeners might be familiar with. They're an existing company. So I think it's definitely worrisome. And Wyoming actually, it's one of only a handful of states that has a part-time legislature. So their full legislature is actually, by their constitution, only allowed to meet for 60 days every 2 years. So that's not a lot of time for these people. Are also, Wyoming legislators are paid less than in any other part of the country. So they're basically all either are independently wealthy or have part-time jobs. So you have ranchers, oil workers, physician's assistants, doctors, who then for really just effectively a month out of the year need to learn all this stuff. And it really opens the door for, and this isn't just something that I've written about, lots of people have written about how when we have governments that don't really have the capacity to be the thought leaders, to do their own research, it really opens the door. This happens on the federal level too, where you see Congress having its capacity gutted over time, where then it makes it easier for, state house reps, state senators, their staffers to just rely on what industry is telling them, rely on what lobbyists are telling them, rather than being in a position to do their own research. And this was a specifically very complicated area. I mean, I know cryptocurrencies are confusing to many people, and, state government is no exception here.
And we will talk about this as we progress, but this is what stays in Wyoming in this instance, or I should say what happens in Wyoming in this instance does not stay in Wyoming. And so when we start to talk about part-time lawmakers being essentially lobbied by a former investment banker who then has a position, even though it's not elected, she has an opportunity to essentially forward or be part of forwarding bills that get voted upon. That's not just for Wyoming. Ultimately, this is something that will infect has the opportunity to infect the entire banking system. We'll get to that part of the story in a bit. But let's just talk about this whole money transmitter law. Like the thing that inspired her, she wanted to donate money to her alma mater, but she didn't want to convert the Bitcoin into dollars because then she will not have maximized her tax deduction, essentially, that's involved in this, right? Because if I have what appears to be $50 worth of Bitcoin in my Bitcoin account or whatever online digital wallet I have, when I convert that, it turns into, let's just say, $45. And then I donate that $45. I don't get the $50 worth of Bitcoin value that I would get. I get $45, and that's where I get my tax deduction. But we should say the first evaluation of that money it's fictional. I mean, it's not, like if $45 is what it's worth because it costs you this much money to turn it into real money. If I can have Bitcoin pay essentially my taxes, which it's doing, if I can donate it to a place, I can apply that value to my taxes. It's effectively paying my taxes off. It's certainly reducing the debt. And then Bitcoin itself becomes more valuable, which is in some ways an inherent problem in it as a currency because, man, yesterday I could buy a toothbrush with the Bitcoin I held, and tomorrow I can buy a Cadillac. That seems a little bit of a problem for a currency. But hi, I'm Sam Seder. You can watch the rest of this interview and more on our Peacock show, which streams at 5 p.m. weekdays on The Choice from Peacock TV.